I've regularly got to see behind the door at number 10, and it looks pretty lonely. And I'm not sure that the things that I value really highly, things like my mental health that we've talked about, things like my marriage, all that sort of stuff, whether these sorts of things can really survive in that sort of crucible.
My name is Jonny Ball, and I'm the founder of Campaign Force, a not-for-profit that inspires, trains and coaches the armed forces community to stand up and serve again. I've served on the front line of military operations and in civilian life, the front line of UK politics. This Veterans in Politics podcast is a set of interviews brought to you by Campaign Force and sets out to explore how the military community can help make our politics a better place. I lean into my little black book of contacts and sit down with individuals from across the world of politics, sharing secrets, giving tips and advice, and inspiring the next generation. We are Campaign Force. This is the Veterans in Politics podcast. Let's introduce you to our guest.
First up for this second season of Veterans in Politics is Ruth Davidson MSP. Our host Jonny has always lived by the mantra of don't meet your heroes. Well, unless her name is Ruth Davidson, of course. Jonny and Ruth chatted about their shared connection of reserve service, Scottish independence, and whether or not she will ever be leader of the UK Conservatives. It's time for you to meet our guest.
Anyway, Ruth, thank you so much for coming on today. And I'm enormously excited about having a conversation with you. You've been certainly one of those people that I've for a long time wanted to connect to. And it was delightful that we were able to connect at that event on mental health not that long ago. So thank you very much. How are you today anyway?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, but it's great to catch up again. And you know, I thought it was a really good event. For those who aren't across it, we did a kind of, for one of the really big employers in London, we did a panel talking about why it's important to have those conversations about mental health, why it's important for employers to recognise it within the workplace, the need for good mental health, to not just have presenteeism at work, to make sure that there's areas for people to talk about. And I think that the veteran kind of perspective on that was really interesting and really important.
Yeah, it was certainly an honour for me to be able to sort of be the talking head for the veterans and armed forces community that day and for us to connect. And I was really pleased that when I sent you that email for us to have a catch up afterwards, how you had said yes, which has led on to today's conversation, which is amazing because you're certainly someone, as a self-confessed political geek, someone I've admired from afar. And seeing your career and seeing the impact that you've made. And I think for me, I was having a chat with my mum actually about you, and my mum is completely not into politics at all, but she knew you. And for me, that kind of speaks volumes in how you're able to cut through. But I mean, why on earth did you get involved in politics in the first place?
Frustration, mostly, actually. So I'd been a journalist for 10 years, working first in kind of papers and then in broadcast. And I was working at the BBC and loved it. You know, and it's such a kind of honor of a job. And, you know, I never didn't like the privilege of it, the ability to kind of grab politicians by the lapels and ask them all the questions that the people at home wanted answered. But one thing that kind of got frustrating was that my job was to tell people what was going on in Scotland, but it wasn't to change things. In fact, because I worked for the BBC, it was specifically not to insert yourself in the story. The job was to be an honest narrator. It wasn't to be an actor or an agent of change. And, you know, I was kind of thinking that, well, I can change things. There's the stuff I want to do, that I want to go further than just talk about it. And that led me to kind of put my hand up and quit a very good job with a good pension that my mother was appalled about. To try and stand as a Tory in Glasgow in sort of 2008, 9, 10, 11. And you know, these were not high watermarks for the Tories in Scotland, particularly, and Glasgow and specifically. So it was a bit of a risk, but I just wanted to do something. I wanted to, you know, make changes, and that's why I got involved.
It's funny you should mention wanting to do something. A previous guest of ours, Sir Julian Brazier, a piece of advice that he offered on our podcast was, you know, for people to get into politics, to not to be something, but to do something. And for you to say that again back to me it speaks volumes.
Well, yeah, and I think that's what it's all about. I mean, it doesn't matter what colour of rosette you wear. All political parties are looking for people who want to get stuff done. And it doesn't matter what age you're at, what stage in your career you're at, whether you're sort of male or female, whether you've got a disability, whether you come from an ethnic minority. None of that is stuff that is gets in the way or anything like that. What everybody is looking for is people that are already involved and committed to their local community. And whether that's through a network at work, whether that's through, their church or their, temple, or or their mosque, whether that's through something that they do with a local charity, whether that's getting involved in their kids' school. We want people that give of themselves, because that's actually what it should be about. Now, all of the stuff that goes along with politics, all of the being shouted at on television stuff, that's great, and it is part of the job, and you've got to be prepared for that. And and political parties will help you get the skills and the preparation for that. But that's such a small part of the job. At its base, politics is about representing large groups of people and making decisions on all of our behalfs. That's what representative democracy is. And the sort of people that you need, the sort of people that succeed, that go through multiple campaigns, not getting elected and stick with it, and then do get elected, are the people that are willing to put in the graft. And it's all parties want grafters.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you anymore, having worked behind the scenes of politics for many years now. In fact, sounds like we got involved around about the same time, in the late noughties, I think it was, that I first got involved, or I think 2006, 2007, when I first started to engage for the very first time. But another thing that we got in common, actually, is our military links. And we both served in what was the Territorial Army and now the Army Reserve. So tell us a little bit more about your service links.
Yeah, I feel like such a fraud when I talk about this, because I was absolutely army barmy, and I joined my local regiment, local to where I was working at the time in Glasgow, which was 32 Signals. So I was a scaly back, and they broke me. So I was doing my officer training, and I was down at Westbury. And I was down in February, and I think they used to call it the physical courage test. I don't know if they still do, but that bit where you've got to kind of run up and like jump through a window frame and land on the other side, kind of head first and all that sort of thing. And they were looking for somebody to go first, and Bold Davidson sticks the hand up, grand, not realizing that it had snowed overnight and nobody had broken up the sandpit on the other side. Completely over rotated, landed on the top of my spine, and broke my back, and ended up in Salisbury General Hospital for quite some time before having to try and get a flight home. So yeah, I went back to the army as soon as I could after that. Ended up falling off the Pentlands in a night exercise, was taken aside by my my OC and told that I was an insurance risk to the British Army. So that was my inglorious couple of years in the Territorial Army, was serving as a signaller, being recruited for officer training and selection, and then breaking myself pretty spectacularly. So yeah, so I don't have a chest full of campaign medals, and I've never pretended that I do.
I think, well, thanks for sharing. I mean, the fact that you went through that pretty traumatic time as well from those injuries, it must have been quite frustrating as well, because like me, army barmy, watching soldier as a kid, the rest of it, and for that kind of, I mean, we're sort of giving about it now, but it must have been quite disappointing as well to.
Oh, I was raging, and also I was furious with my OC as well, because he was like, you're an insurance risk. It's like, mate, if I'd wanted to sue the army, I could have done it by now, and I didn't on purpose, like, because they didn't have a medic on base. They made me walk to the ambulance before I was like immobilized for several days. I mean, it was like I didn't have the best immediate first aid response, I think, to breaking my back, is fair to say. But I was just like, don't you dare tell me what I can and can't do. But there's rules and there's rules. So yeah. But to be fair, they haven't held a grudge, because they did invite me back to be their honorary colonel a couple of years ago. So I'm currently doing that. So somewhere it's been lost in the mists of time that I could get them into trouble.
So how's it been back in uniform?
Yeah, well, it's been a funny old year. I mean, it's been very hard for everybody in terms of training nights not happening in the way that they used to and all that sort of thing. So I'm really hopeful that this year it can kind of step back up in the physical sense again, because the physicality of what we do and what the armed forces does is such an integral part of it. Yes, of course, there's always room for training and for development and for professional development, particularly in one of the kind of trade regiments, so like signals. But you need to get out. You need to be physically meeting people. You need to, be getting sort of eyes on, hands on with all your, the rest of your team, and it's just been really difficult, I think, for everybody. And I don't think it's been confined to just our regiment. I think it's been lots of regiments.
Yeah, absolutely. I deliver phase 2 training within the Army Reserves, and we've really adapted. I mean, literally, I've been sat in this very room with uniform from the waist up.
And Cookie Monster pajamas on the bottom with some fluffy baffies. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, and nice hot chocolate on the side, but delivering training, and the adaptability of our people has been unbelievable. The enthusiasm and keenness of our recruits to attend those training sessions and get through the training no matter what, despite everything that's happening in our personal lives, and also the barriers that are around those kind of training. But you do need that contact when delivering these kind of courses.
The thing is, adapt and overcome. It's not a soundbite, it's not a phrase. It is something that the British Armed Forces are exceptionally good at, and they will think their way around, over, under, or through a problem, and they do it time and time again. And I've been involved in a couple over the last year of kind of big Zoom calls with people that are providing leadership or women in the forces or some of the other things that I kind of do. And, the enthusiasm to get stuff done, to make sure that they're still achieving, that they're getting wins on the board is there, and it's there in Legion. And also the adaptability of our armed forces, because we're talking about, you and I are talking about people that are kind of not doing as much as they would ordinarily do right now. But, there are other people in uniforms that have been going miles above and beyond, that have been, administering COVID tests, that have been doing, that have been inserted into government as logistical planners or into health boards, that have been working in terms of the vaccination rollout, that have been doing all this kind of stuff. So in terms of the amount of civil contingency work that has gone on from the armed forces this year, I mean, it's been phenomenal.
Yeah, I think so. I was chatting to the NHS employers last week, and they were talking about the high influx of recruitment from the armed forces that they've benefited from over the last couple of years. And it's phenomenal numbers that they've managed to achieve. But then we were talking about the reservist medics who, have literally gone from the back of running a MERT team on the back of a Chinook in Afghanistan to now on the front line of COVID-19. So the adaptability of our people and those leadership skills and the human skills they've picked up along the way are just second to none. And clearly you've picked up a few of those skills from your military life, both now as an honorary colonel.
That was slick, Jonny. Like, it's like you've been doing radio forever. That link there was just, spot on.
I do try. But in terms of leadership, it's probably going to be really irritate you now. The question that you'll probably ask all the time. Obviously, you were leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, but not only that, from my own, when I was working in a political party, there was all the talk around Ruth Davidson, and is she going to be leader of the national UK Conservative Party? Why do you think people have always cited you as a future leader of the Conservative Party in the UK?
I've no idea, and I've been pretty clear down the line that, actually, it's a pretty tough job, and not one that I have ever had the kind of ambition to do, mostly because I've been really lucky in that I've regularly got to see behind the door at number 10, and it looks pretty lonely, and I'm not sure that the things that I value really highly, things like my mental health that we've talked about, things like my marriage, all that sort of stuff, whether these sorts of things can really survive in that sort of crucible.
Yeah.
And, now I've got a young son, I've got a toddler, your priorities do change when you have kids. And you talked about being kind of the leader of the Scottish Conservatives and the kind of leadership skills from the army that I brought into that. And it's true, like the way things happened in Scotland at the time that I got elected, I literally got elected to the Scottish Parliament on the, our election was on the Thursday, our count was on the Friday. I was into Parliament the next week, and on the day that I arrived in Parliament, my leader resigned.
That sounds like the worst Craig David song.
Yeah, really. And we did have a very long leadership election. I mean, we had sort of 4 or 5 months by the time we'd kind of opened nominations, all that sort of stuff. But, I was the leader of the party within 6 months from getting elected for the very first time. I mean, it really was kind of, private on Monday and brigadier by Friday type stuff. And the only sort of thing that I could adapt and use, the only kind of toolkit in my locker, was my officer training. And that was all I had. I hadn't had any leadership training as a journalist. I was a reporter and a producer and a presenter, but I hadn't managed staff. I hadn't managed an organization. I didn't have that kind of skill set, apart from what I'd learned through the TA and doing my officer training for Sandhurst. And that's what, you use what you have, and that's what I took into it. And if I hadn't done the TA, there's no way that I would have survived the first couple of years of my leadership. Not a chance. I needed those skills, and I've completely adapted them, because the skills work, but actually the way in which you administer them. A political organization is a voluntary organization. It's not one that has a clear hierarchy. It's not one wherein, even as the leader, you're in charge of all staff members that work directly to their MSP or their MP, etc. You can't hire or fire MPs because they're elected at the ballot box. You've got all of that sort of stuff. So you really have to bring people with you, which is a different skill from command and control. But the skills that you learn in the army absolutely help 100%. And that's why, actually, I think political parties have been slow off the mark in terms of physically going out and recruiting from these organizations, from, Army, Navy, Air Force, because, certainly looking at the House of Commons, the people that have come in, I mean, it's quality candidates, and you can see the skill sets that they bring and that are needed in politics.
Absolutely. And there are 50 MPs within Parliament that have a military background, and I've number crunched those as the political geek and analyst that I am. But and
you value at least 12 of those 50.
Well, they all come on the podcast, don't they, of course? This is exactly what we're trying to achieve with this podcast and with the wider campaign force, is really try and tap into those 15,000 that leave the armed forces every year, because they can make our politics a better place. And your example will be part of that, in order to inspire someone listening today thinking, do you know what? That's an interesting journey with a military background. That's something I can attain to, whether it be in local government, MSP or MP.
Yeah, exactly. Or AM in Wales, or, MLA over in Northern Ireland. And you've got, there's at least one person that I know currently in the Northern Irish Assembly who's come up to do that route as well. I mean, the one caveat I would give it, I make a joke about how quickly I became leader after I got elected, but I'd been through a couple of elections before I got elected first. I mean, it was a couple of years to even kind of get to that point. So I would say to people, when they're leaving the armed forces, don't expect that your next job will be as an elected person. It probably won't be. You will have to do a job while you take on that campaigning on top of that as well, because that's kind of the route that most people come up, certainly in most parties. And that's fine though, because you learn those skills while you're doing other things, and it shows that you're able to turn your hand to lots of stuff. And it also allows you to suck it and see, because, being an elected politician is different from other jobs. The scrutiny is different. The abuse you get is different. You do need to know whether it's for you or not. The campaigning, I love campaigning. It's my favourite part of the job. Elections are my favourite bit, which is just as well because we have so blooming many of them in Scotland. But they're not for everyone. So, it's good to be able to, try before you buy in that sense.
Yeah, I think so. And Jonny Mercer, when he was on the episode 1 of the podcast, he said that it's a bit like any organization. You got to do the crap jobs first.
Yeah, you do. You have to. You got to clean the latrines.
You got to sweep the hangars and all that good stuff, like we're used to in the military. But I mean, you must have on leave.
You got to do guard duty through the night, on a Friday night when everyone else is off base. Like, you got to do it.
Exactly. And in your role, you must have come across all different styles of leadership from all the different organizations you meet, from
Yeah, both the screamers and the empathetic ones, and the ones that, will have a 4-hour committee meeting because they can't take a decision. Yeah, I've met them all of them.
But do you think this period of our lives has been a good moment for leadership? And can you give any good examples that you've seen during this crisis?
Yeah, so I think, the one that I would come back to actually is a kind of international example. I think the way in which Bill Gates has pulled both the philanthropic community together and the scientific community together to help with the vaccine funding and research, to make sure that barriers that usually exist are just swept away, has been phenomenal, and will benefit everyone. And I think if you're looking particularly at that side of things, the way in which AstraZeneca and Oxford University got together to collaborate for their vaccine, done setting out right at the beginning that it was going to be not for profit for poor countries, to make sure that a global pandemic has a global cure, and that you're not disadvantaged depending on where you live, I think is so important. So I think you've seen some really, really top-notch leadership in these kind of ways.
Definitely. I think, hey, globalism is alive and well, if we get seeing all these organizations coming together to collaborate on these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. COVID's been really interesting in that regard, in that, it's something that has affected all around the world. It didn't start here, it started in China. It's in, however many 100 countries around the world. But one of the significant responses that people have been to shut down areas, local authority areas, have travel bans, have flight bans, all that sort of stuff, to kind of have a kind of local response to it, but to also then try and scale up kind of the global vaccine, the global cure. So I think this is one of the ones where, 3-4 years from now, we'll still be picking through all the different threads of this, different responses, how it worked, what countries did what, who did stuff well, who did stuff that didn't work. And also because we learned on the job, like, we didn't know what this virus was. There are some things that we were doing back in February that we're not doing now, and stuff that we're doing now that we weren't doing back in February. And it's only because our knowledge gap is, our knowledge gap has decreased. It's because we've learned along the way. And, all of this is going to come out in the wash, but it probably won't be for some time. We'll still be talking about this 3-4 years from now, easily.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned in that about the connectivity from local to international almost.
Yeah.
I think it's actually been quite a good moment for local government, because they've by and large been the deliverer of a lot of the community response, the coordination through resilience forums, etc. But devolved
and in all of my time in politics, the level of government that affects everybody day to day most often is local government, without a shadow of a doubt. And you look at the way in which you speak to bus companies that make sure that they've got routes on to get essential workers to hospitals during this pandemic. You look at the way in which learning hubs have opened up for key workers' children. You look at the way in which enforcement has come in for some of the regulations for shutting businesses and restaurants and bars and all that sort of stuff. That's all local government. All of that is local government. And, it's often the kind of unsexy part of politics. People think that being a councillor is in some way a lesser gig because it's not always full time, because it's not paid the same way as an MP is paid. But in terms of the efficacy that you can have, the impact that you can have in a community, I mean, it's right up there.
100%. And I probably spend every day converting people from wanting to be MPs to becoming councillors, because I'm so passionate about local government. And that is where I think that the armed forces community, veterans, reservists, spouses, cadet force, adult volunteers, by doing that almost another part-time job, they can have such an impact on their communities. And I think in devolved government too, we've seen, I think, an increased understanding, good bits and bad bits of devolved government throughout this crisis.
Well, yeah, because it's been health. I mean, the way in which it's worked, the health service is wholly devolved in Scotland, wholly devolved in Northern Ireland. And a lot of the ancillaries that go around that are also devolved. I mean, if this had been a transportation crisis, or it had been, some other thing that, an incident overseas where you're trying to repatriate Brits or something like that, then you would have seen a much different way of working. But things like keeping people in jobs, the furlough scheme, the self-employed scheme, over 1 million Scots have been, supported by the UK government directly, as in, money into your pocket right now. Let's keep you afloat till we can get past all of this. So you see in real time sort of the way the UK government works, the way the Scottish government works, and like you say, the way local authorities work. So you see the different stratas of government, and how they work together, and what their areas of expertise are and their areas of delivery are.
Yeah, I think the understanding from sort of Joe Public has increased throughout this, and they hopefully will see that return in the ballot box, with people participating a lot more with local government, devolved government. But of course, the other thing it has done as well, Ruth, is the Scottish independence referendum debate has definitely ramped up in the perception in the media.
It's never gone away. I mean, the thing is, England's noticed, but it's never been away in Scotland.
Yeah.
Not since the referendum in 2014. I mean, it's always been there. And, you know, we have a nationalist government who wants to pursue independence for Scotland and pulls every lever that it has to get it, because it's their stated aim and it has been for more than 90 years. So, you know, COVID's one reason, Brexit's another reason. But, you know, they were also advocating for independence when the NHS was being set up 70 years ago. And they were advocating for independence all the way through the Second World War when, you know, Scots, English, Northern Irish and Welsh were all fighting together. So, you know, the next thing that comes along, they'll say that's a reason for independence as well. I mean, you know, I'm not being cynical about it, but, you know, we have seen 90 years of whatever the political issue of the moment is. The Scottish National Party says that's a reason for independence. It's what they do. And, you know, they don't try and hide it. It's, you know, clause 1 of their party's, you know, contracts. So what are you going to do?
Business as usual for the SNP, but perhaps the rest of the UK have just sort of woken up a little bit more and paid attention to it.
Well, you say the rest of the UK, but actually what you mean is England, because England doesn't have an English parliament, because, you know, it uses the UK Parliament as the delivery mechanism for England. So the health minister is the health minister for England. Wales has a health minister. Scotland has a health minister. Northern Ireland has a health minister. In terms of education, okay, England and Wales are very close, but Scotland has had its own education system completely all through the 300 years of union. Northern Ireland has a completely separate education system. You know, these things are different anyway. And I think it's just people in England have realised that something else exists elsewhere. And I think that has left an appetite for some people to say, well, why isn't England getting the same level of kind of autonomy in some areas? And I think that there are questions there that probably need explored about what the makeup of the United Kingdom is, the fact that it's not... you know, and the way in which devolution has happened is that it's not happened in a holistic sense. It's happened in a kind of bilateral sense. So there's been a couple of upgrades to the Scotland Act down the years, which was, you know, Edinburgh and London, you know, legislating for things to change. There have been a very recent upgrade in Wales for things to change. We've seen the re-establishment of the Parliament in Northern Ireland, and that's all happened sort of bilaterally with Westminster. But in terms of kind of four nations sitting together, working together, in the way in which this works, that's the bit that's been kind of missing, I think. And I think there needs to be more kind of partnership working across all the devolved administrations and with the UK government.
Definitely, I think an opportunity. I mean, I went to university in Wales, served in Northern Ireland, and obviously have a huge, and I've got Scottish relation.
And you've got a great Scottish accent right there. I can hear it.
There you go, you know. So yeah, I take obviously an interest in these things.
Got a Scottish brand of whiskey? Is that what you're going to tell me? No.
But no, that's as far as a couple of Scottish answers as far as my links to Scotland.
We'll take you.
We'll take it. That's it. Yeah, but but no, I think it really has focused the mind on everyday folk in their interest in local government, devolved government, and made it a little bit more relevant. But I think with that, if we're going to see more participation and the realization that this stuff is important for local people, where that local delivery happens, we're going to need a better class of politician, because it can't just be all about, you know, Ruth Davidsons of this world and as MSPs. We're going to need councillors at a lower level to be able to have a really good impact, and then we need to raise the bar there. And indeed, a book was written by Isabel Hardman on, you know, why we get the wrong politicians. I mean, do you think that's a fair assessment, that we have got the wrong politician? And if so, or if not, what does the right politician look like?
Well, I think in any organisation, so you look, there's 650 MPs in the House of Commons, there's, you know, 129 MSPs in Holyrood, there's, I think it's 60 in Cardiff Bay. To my eternal shame, I actually don't know how many DLAs there are in Stormont. You know, you'll have ones that are, you know, flyers, you'll have ones that are indifferent, you'll have ones that are, you know, pretty good workhorses behind the scenes, but are never going to be, you know, stars and have no wish to be. And you'll get some that are pretty rum. But I have to say, in you know, all of my time in politics, so that's 10 years elected and a couple of years before that as an activist, and another 10 years before that as a political watcher, honestly, most people are in politics for the right reasons. Genuinely they are. And it doesn't matter what colour of ribbon you wear. most people want to change things for the better. Now, they have different ideas of how to change them. They've got different things that they want to see changed. But most people are in it because they want to change things for the better. And I think, particularly these days, when you get just so much abuse now, so much more than when I even started 10 years ago, it has to be people that have that drive, that want to do things, that come forward, because otherwise, why would you put up with it?
Oh, exactly. Why would you? And particularly when you talk about having, a family and things like that, there are certainly increased reasons for people not to do it. And obviously, I'm obsessed with encouraging people to do it. And there are 20,000 local government representatives across the UK, and elections every year. So loads of opportunity for the armed forces community to stand up and serve again. And I guess my ask of you, if particularly our armed forces community that listen to this podcast, what would be a bit of advice that you might impart upon them if they were just scratching around and just starting to think and having an itch?
Do it. Don't even think. Do it. Absolutely put yourself forward. Go on, throw yourself in it 100%, and make sure you bring 100% of you to the role. Don't try and dress yourself up as what you think a politician is, because they're not. We're all different. We all come from a different background. We've all had different experiences. We've all got different skills. Like, bring yourself to the role, because that's what people want. That's what parties will want. That's what communities will want. They'll want the real, authentic you. So make sure that you bring your whole self to the role, and that you're standing up and championing the things that you care about. And if you care about it, and if it matters to you, if it matters to your family, then it'll matter to other people's families too.
There you go. You've heard it here first. Just do it. If only
do it. Get it done. Get it smashed.
If only I could trademark that slogan. Just do it.
Yeah, am I going to get sued by the Night Corporation now?
I would say, with a caveat, we have stand up and serve again is our way of saying just do it. But certainly, I think we'll leave it there. Ruth, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fun and brilliant.
Brilliant, Jonny.
And thank you so much for all those pieces of advice.
All right, catch you later. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.